Hello, my friends. This is Jeremy. Obviously, by now you probably know who I am and what I do. And yeah, I'm recording a video today. So, get the coffee and settle in. Because I don't think this is going to be an especially brief video, okay? We are going today to put to bed the full topic of planetary strength, okay? Now, that will involve a fair amount of discussion. And what I'd really like to do today is to just cover the whole thing so that we kind of understand what it means to have a planet or a placement that is strong and what it means to have one which is weak. And also what it means to have other perspectives on this issue, because there are lots of ways of looking at it and they're all useful, okay? Astrology is not a single lens, it's a series of perspectives, and we can employ any number of them to give ourselves a more rounded view of what's going on in the soul of a person. Okay. Now you can probably see I have a chart on the page, and that is the chart of the actor Liam Neeson. Okay. You may like Liam Neeson, you may not. I don't know. That's not really relevant. But he's an interesting case. Well, everyone's an interesting case, aren't they? You are an interesting case, but we need something to focus on just to give ourselves an idea. Okay, we don't need to be super familiar with the biographical minutiae of somebody like Liam Neeson. We just need to broadly know that he's an actor, and maybe a few cogent facts about his life. So I'm not going to talk about that right away, though. I'm going to start by saying that a number of people have contacted me. In fact, people contact me on a fairly regular basis saying, will I teach them astrology? And in a way, I've kind of tried to do that through articles, and I have done a couple of courses in the past with varying degrees of success. So what I would like to say is, yes, I can teach you astrology, but I think what people kind of want is something, a little bit formal, right? Now, that opens up, for me, sort of ambiguous concepts of structured teaching and formality in teaching methods and sort of rigor in terms of material and that sort of thing. And that doesn't really, that's just not my thing, we all have our ways, don't we? We have our ways of working. And I would love to share with you what my way of working is. But I think that I have to kind of find a happy medium between sharing the ideas, the concepts, and not sort of tying myself too much into a Saturn role, which I laugh about slightly because it's cogent to the discussion of planetary strength, and we'll perhaps touch on that a bit later. So what I would really like to do is I would like to offer you the opportunity to study astrology using my methods, which I will explain to you. Now, what I don't want to do is place a huge amount of expectation on myself by charging vast fees, but at the same time, I do want some reward for it, okay? Because what I know is that I'm a very skilled astrologer. That doesn't mean that I'm, full of self-importance about it, but I know that I can make a living as an astrologer, just about, and you know, I have expertise, specifically in, you know, certain methods, concepts and approaches that are not very common in the astrological community. So I would like to offer to share that with you, but at the same time I don't want to place an uncomfortable series of pressures and millstones and other Saturnine concepts upon myself. So here's the deal, okay? You can be my student. What that means is that I will talk to you about astrology. I will do a series of videos, I will do a series of posts, I will make supporting materials available to you. And if you participate, and I don't want the, you know, the onerousness of formal study to work against you, okay? So really all I'm looking for is a bit of participation. So answer the odd question, make a few comments, join in the discussion, really, that's all. And at the end of the course, however long it takes, I think it's going to take about, you know, 6 months. I don't know though, you know, don't hold me to that. I'm not signing a contract here. Probably take about 6 months to get you in the groove with the way that I work. And at the end of that, I will send you a certificate, okay? And I'll sign it, and it will say that you have studied astrology under me and you have grasped the concepts, and then you can use those concepts in your own work. And if it will help you, then you can share, you know, your qualification with my school of thought. Okay. So hopefully that will be useful to you. What I intend to do is I intend to make this course available to everybody who is a $20 subscriber. Okay, so that is not, hopefully, too onerous a financial obligation, but it does also make it more worthwhile to me. So what that means is those of you who are already $20 subscribers on my Patreon page, you will get all of this material, of course, with no difference. And if you are one of the other subscribers, offering, you know, subscribing for a different amount, then you will have to up your subscription to join in. Okay. I will not be starting until I don't know, a couple of weeks' time. So, but this video really is like it's a conclusion to the ideas that we have been discussing. Okay, planetary strength, which is really an important concept for a number of reasons, and we can think about those reasons as we go along. But it's very difficult, you see, to kind of comprehend what is important. There are various, you know, for me, when I'm looking at an astrological chart, there are instant judgments that one can make. Okay, so if we're looking at this chart on the page in front of us, you can see that there is a kind of loose stellium of planets around from Venus maybe to Orcus. Up here, Gemini is a very important theme for Liam Neeson. There's a bunch of trines here between Saturn and Neptune and these Gemini planets. Okay, there's a T-square. Okay, this hard pattern of aspects between Uranus, Chiron, and Saturn. It's fairly outer planet energy though, but it is a difficulty for him. Okay, so those are kind of like the obvious, the first level of insights that we would make when we look at a chart. We would see where the tension is, we would see where the ease is. But until we've actually got a method or a means of looking at planetary strength, or at what's important, and what measures highly and what measures weakly, then we will not have a very cogent apprehension of what's going on in this person's astrology. Okay, so I'm going to put my glasses on. I hope that only enhances my handsomeness. So yeah, that's the first thing, right? So you get signed up if you want to join in the course. It'll start in a couple of weeks. I'll send an email out and get some more people signed up, hopefully, and yeah, hopefully it'll be a lot of fun. And because the financial obligation isn't too great on you, I will be able to feel a bit more relaxed about it, and it won't be so much pressure for me, and not so much pressure for you either. And hopefully we'll get a good discussion going, and all learn some things together. Now, planetary strength is what we're talking about today. You obviously will be able to use the calculator, yes? So let me just find that for you. Here it is. This is our guy. So, right. This is the planetary strengths of Liam Neeson. But what I want to say at this point is that this page is one that is freely available to you, and you can use it to calculate the strengths on any particular chart. What I plan to do in the future is I'm going to add a few enhancements to it, right? What I'm working on when I have time, which isn't all that often, is a means of being able to save the charts, so you don't have to keep inputting them again if you've forgotten them or what have you. And I'm going to add a few more points. Okay. One thing that we ought to say is that the strengths and weaknesses of Sun through Saturn are well known. They're extremely well known because of the provenance of ancient astrology. I mean, this stuff has been worked through by everyone from the ancient Chaldeans through the Egyptians, all sorts of Rhetorius, the Egyptian, he was a great astrologer. He started some of this work. It went on through Ptolemy, the Alexandrian astrologers like Vettius Valens, and right through to more modern times, when we're thinking of people like Alexandre Volgin, Alan Leo, even Charles Carter. So we have this enormous, rich tapestry of ancient astrological knowledge that's been brought forward, and we are very, very confident about the relative strengths of placements and weaknesses of placements of everything from Sun through to Saturn for this reason. When we get into the outer planets, we have less provenance, we have less security in our our suppositions and our expectations. It's not as straightforward to we can't be as certain. That's the point. But we can be somewhat certain. I think we can certainly be more secure in the placements of Uranus and Neptune. Pluto is a little difficult because it's a very it's just a difficult energy, isn't it, in and of itself. And we're going to discuss that as we go through today. Orcus, well, we have no provenance at all for Orcus. We have no, as far as I'm aware, almost nobody else has even looked at it. So, this is my work on Orcus is all I've really got to go on. So I'm constantly refining my ideas and playing around with the formulas and trying to see what works. Okay. And by the same token, so we can add other points in, like Chiron, but again, even Chiron is a very new type of energy. I think it's often misunderstood. I think that we can do better in our apprehension of AUKUS's values and themes, and I hope to address some of that today as well. So it's probably going to be a fairly long discussion, and I hope that you're you're comfortable and you've got your cup of coffee or your glass of water. Important to stay hydrated, and we will get into it. Right. So yes, I'm going to add these improvements. I'm going to add some further points. I will be continually refining the information relating to AUKUS, even Chiron. I want to add Hygeia, because I think Hygeia is a really important point in one's astrology. It's so underrated. I would argue that it is more important than Chiron, considerably more so. It tells us more. It gives us a longer, stronger, deeper, wider narrative than Chiron does. It's much more apprehendable in one's life than Chiron is. It is a commonality in human life. Chiron, on the other hand, is not. Okay, and I'll explain why I think that's the case. So yeah. Right. I'll also add Ixion in. That's obviously going to happen when we are, we're at that stage. The Ixion book, I started writing the final sort of draft, but it's a kind of mixture of final draft and ongoing, studies and discussions. So, and with everything that's happened this year, it's not going to be ready this year. So I did say I'd have it ready for 2020, but it will be 2021 now. I'm not sure exactly when, but hopefully by the middle of next year. Life gets in the way, doesn't it? And I really have to say that Ixion's much harder to write than AUKUS. It's a more subtle energy. It's an incredibly important energy, but it's not one of those things. It's like all Halian energies are. They're hidden. They're psychological energies, so we do not see them in plain sight. They are inferred. Okay, they're implied, rather. We infer them, but others imply them in their actions. So we are always aware when Pluto or AUKUS is at work. Okay, we feel it, we apprehend it, but it's not. It's always disguised as something else. So Hadian energy is always masked, in keeping with the mask of Pluto, and it's dressed up. It's a bit like a Trojan horse. People use Pluto energy or Hadian energy of whatever type, and they disguise it as something else in order to make the kind of penetration that they want to into the matter at hand. Exactly like a Trojan horse. So, in fact, I'm going to write that down because I think that's quite useful. So, yeah. Trojan horse. Idiots, right. Planetary strength. So what does it mean if a planet it scores highly? So let's look at Liam's scores here. Look at his Mercury. It's off the charts, isn't it? And look at his Neptune. Incredibly weak. Okay, so what does that mean? Yes? Because that's really the point, isn't it? It's all very well to say, well, my Mercury is my dominant planet, it's the lord of the geniture, and my Neptune is, what's the opposite of the lord of the geniture? It's like, the scrubbing maid, it's like the lowliest peasant in the kingdom. So, and has no power. It's the sort of least privileged position. Most privileged to least privileged. So which is your king or queen, and which is your dirty peasant, slopping around in the mud, outside the palace somewhere. So these are the questions, because it's really important to know what it actually means. And how do we use it practically? What do we divine from the fact that Mercury is very strong in Liam Neeson's chart? But before we even get into that, what we need to think about is, I just want to take a couple of points out of this, because let's remove Chiron and let's remove Orcus. Okay, I mentioned this yesterday. Peregrination. Now, a feral, peregrine, singleton planet, those are all terms that are used to describe a planet which has no Ptolemaic aspect. Okay, so when we say Ptolemaic, we mean those aspects which were commonly employed by Claudius Ptolemy, who lived around about the 1st century AD in Alexandria. And he is the guy, okay, Ptolemy is the guy whom we have to thank, because he collated all the information that he knew about astrology. He was the world's foremost astrologer of his time, and he wrote it all down. He wrote all these ideas down and passed them on, and they went, because we have surviving texts that he put together, we have access to the wisdom of the ancients where astrology is concerned. So we have a great debt of gratitude to Ptolemy, and it's because of him that we have the study of ancient astrology at all. We would have a much newer understanding if it weren't for him. So Claudius Ptolemy only used the major aspects, so we conjunction, opposition, trine, square, sextile. Okay, the five major divisions, actually, of the circle. Yes, by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. He didn't use a fifth, and I love the fifth harmonic. I love it. I think it tells us really amazing things, but it only works. It only works for certain types of people, and we'll do something about that as we come along, because it's a much neglected area of study. But what it does is it tells us a story about unique talents and gifts, and unusual types of creativity. But certainly Ptolemy didn't employ it. Okay, so we only have the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6th divisions of the circle, and they're all very important nonetheless. So when we use only those aspects in a fairly tight orb, okay, my general prescription for peregrination is that we should have conjunctions at 8 degrees top, oppositions, trines and squares at 6 degrees, and sextiles at 2 degrees. Okay, now if under those conditions there are no aspects to a planet, it is peregrine. Now, I've discussed this in what we wrote. Peregrine is a term that is used in traditional astrology, and a lot of traditional astrologers get upset when we evolutionary astrologers, which is what I guess we are, use it. They feel a little bit territorial. I don't think there's any need for that, because I think it's based on a fundamental misapprehension of what we mean by peregrine. What we mean is kind of the same thing as they mean. They think we have stolen their terminology, okay, and bastardized it in some way and used it for something completely different. But actually, what the ancients meant by a peregrine placement was one which is, it comes from the Latin peregrinus, which means beyond the border, sort of outside the normal bounds. So And it's where the word peregrine falcon obviously comes from, because a peregrine falcon is a bird of prey that is very solitary and lives, far outside the normal bounds. So, up in the firmament up there. So, you're really simply extending the concept to mean the same kind of thing. Okay, so one of the most peregrine points in the zodiac for Saturn is 27 degrees Aries, for example. It has no dignity at that particular degree. So anyone who has Saturn at 27 Aries is in a very unfortunate situation, according to the ancients. And I do think there's some measure of truth to that. But of course, we evolve our understanding as astrology evolves. It's not a static, dead language from 2,000 years ago. It's changing as the archetypes change. So of course, as we embrace these new Hadean ideas, we have now, since Freud, 1930, discovery of Pluto, and Freud's interpretation of dreams, I think, was 1931. So they're absolutely chronologically concurrent. So we can say that with the advent of Pluto, psychology became a true and compelling part of the human design. And with the subsequent addition of further Hadean ideas and concepts, we are gaining breadth and depth to that psychology. So we are becoming more psychological, okay, with the inclusion of each of these new archetypes. Now, I really want to say that that isn't to say that psychology didn't exist before Freud, because of course it did, and there are always people who are more in advance of the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist being, the cultural understanding of human life at any given time. So yes, there are always going to have been people who are psychological long before Freud. But what Freud did, or actually, let's just say this as it is, what Pluto did, was it made us all psychological. Okay, so there was a time before Freud when plenty of people really weren't very psychological at all. They were very outward. They didn't really have these hidden, shadowy inner dimensions. They were quite one-dimensional. And you can kind of see that. You only need to watch some very old films and even read some old literature or news reports, and you can kind of see that people weren't really driven by unconscious forces in the way that people are commonly nowadays. So I don't think that's controversial. So these new, Hadean ideas and Hadean archetypes are adding these kinds of dimensions. Right, I've kind of lost my thread. I'm pretty sure you can tell that, can't you? We are talking about Liam Neeson anyway. Now, when I was talking about the strength of various points, we're talking about Ptolemaic aspects. What we also have to include, as I said yesterday, is the idea of peregrination. Now, that's where I was, wasn't I? Right, you have to forgive me, because I love a tangent. So Jupiter and Mars, as you can see, are both peregrine. Okay, they're outside the borders. They don't have any connection with the rest of the chart. Now that's what we talk about, or that's what we think about when we consider the idea of aspects, and Ptolemaic aspects in particular. That isn't to say that minor or other aspects aren't important. They do offer a means of connectedness. Yes. So I don't know if we can see, if we change this aspect set here to something, just standard. What have we got? Yeah, okay, right. immediately we see we've got a yod to Pluto. A yod sextile between two planets form both quincunx, or quincunx too, yes, planet Jupiter. And also the orbs are slightly wider when we look at things in, we're a bit more generous with the amount of distance we can have between points. So what we see there is that not only is Jupiter peregrine in a Ptolemaic measurement, he's also at the focus of a yod. And this tells us actually that Jupiter is probably at much higher scoring, yes, and much more difficult for Liam Neeson than he may at first appear to be, on the basis of his placement in the chart and on the basis of these scores. Okay, because where is Jupiter? 8 points, so it's actually quite a weak point. But if we add into that the concept of peregrination, we could probably add 30 points to that, okay, making him 38 points and potentially being stronger than Mercury. Okay, the other point as well that is also peregrine is Mars. Yes, there are sesqui squares here between 135 degree aspects between Mars and Sun and Mercury, right? So there again, it's not like the planet isn't connected to the chart in some way, but these are like, these minor aspects are like, they are power conduits, so we can channel, using them, we can channel interactions between those points. It does carry a charge, if you like, between, in this case, Mars and the conjunction of Sun and Mercury. But it's not got much bandwidth. Okay, so it's a really difficult connection to make. And in this case, with sesqui squares, with quincunxes, it's not a comfortable or easy energy to use. And people feel compelled to do it. They kind of have to, but it's slightly tense. Okay. So yeah, we could probably add 20-30 points to Mars as well. So it suddenly becomes a little bit less straightforward to look at these scores and say, well, Mercury is the standout energy. Mercury is enormously important in this guy's chart. Yeah, no question about it. It's a superpower energy. Anything 30 points or above is a superpower. It's something that we can't dismiss. We have to sit up and take notice. Now, what this really tells us is that, yes, Mercury's right up there, but maybe Mars is and maybe Jupiter is. So we need to take notice of all these things. Peregrination is really tricky because we can't just take it for granted, because sometimes when there is no connection to that planet, particularly if there is no aspect at all, not even a minor one, then, right, that planet may be just completely uninvolved in the persona, in the personality. And because there's no way of connecting with it, not at all. And so what sometimes will happen is that people will just not use it. It will be missing, completely missing from the totality of their character, of their soul. It's like a sort of, it's like a black hole. Yeah, just things disappear into it, and it doesn't register. So that's rare, but it does happen. Generally speaking, it works the other way. We notice a measurable amplification of that particular energy in the person's life. So this is the first thing to do. The first thing to do is to set your astrology software up in some way so that you have only those Ptolemaic aspects switched on, that you set the orbs to 8 degrees for a conjunction, 6 for an opposition, trine or square, and 2 for a sextile. And then note if you have any unaspected planets, and make sure you only have Sun through Pluto switched on. Okay, I talked a little bit yesterday, didn't I, about how the even the outer planets have somewhat dubious presence in that equation, but let's leave it there for now. You know, and lots of people will find they have something that's peregrine. My son, for example, is peregrine, so you know, that lends my son a lot of power, I think. Although at one time I think it was a bit switched off. But most people will find that they have some peregrine point, and you can work your way through and even look at some of the minor points and see if they're peregrine, because sometimes people really do have a peregrine Hygeia or a peregrine Ceres or a peregrine Aesculapia, something even quite obscure, and it becomes an important factor and an important archetype in their life because it gets sort of this enormous boost of energy from being unintegrated into the wider chart. Right, okay, now listen, let's talk now, because I've waffled on quite a lot, about what it means. Okay, what does it mean when you know the planet is strong or the planet is weak? Because this is really what we want to get to. Okay, right, well, let me just start by saying it's really simple, actually. It's a subjective thing, but the person who has a very strong planet, right, is kind of focused on that planet. So that planet becomes an important factor in their personal approach to life. Okay, and conversely, they have a very weak planet. The themes and ideals of that planet are not important to them. So it's as simple as that. It really is that simple. Now, what I've done is I've put together a list somewhere. Where is it? Here, right. I put together this list. And this tells us, I'll make this available to you so that you can have a copy of it. Right, let's pop it there like that. Now these are the kind of themes. I mean, you probably know this stuff. I'm not trying to teach you the basics. I have enormous respect for all of you guys and what you know and what you bring to the discussion. But sometimes it just helps to have things spelled out clearly and succinctly. So that's why I've prepared this, and I'll make it available so that you can use it yourself if you do client work, or if you are just a dabbler or whatever it is, or you're working your way towards something. But hopefully it will help you to convey the ideas, the themes, the concepts. So if your sun is really strong, okay, then you have a great deal of interest in these basic solar ideas. Okay, if it's really weak, you don't have any interest in them. Okay, so somebody with a 30 plus sun is probably going to be a very creative person. I mean, doesn't always work like this. I think we probably need to refine our ideas a little bit, because sun is kind of Leo energy, so it's leadership and creativity, right? There are both these facets to it, and I think that generally people go one way or the other. Okay, solar, people with a strong interest in solar energy, for whatever reason, they tend to fall one side of that divide or the other side. So they'll either be a leader or a creative. Okay, but often you'll find that they combine the two as well. But sometimes you do really get that clear division. They're not interested in creativity at all, and they're just interested in leading. being in charge, being the figurehead, the king. Yes. It's probably got something a little bit to do with one's level of consciousness, because I think that there are different types of leadership. There's there's kind of mentorship as well, which is a much higher vibration in the in the leadership spectrum. You see what I mean by that? I'm sure you know what I mean by that. But in any case, creativity is one of the first things that you would think about. So somebody who has a very high solar score is probably going to be quite interested in creativity. And again, peregrination is really important in this regard, because some of the most sort of archetypal artists, for example, have all had Peregrine Sun. I know that Van Gogh did, and Picasso did, and Maurice Utreloh did, and lots of others. So it often becomes a point of extreme focus. This idea of being, a creative person, of making art, or writing too comes under that. There are all sorts of creative endeavours. So yeah, creativity, which is a form of, as we see here, it's a form of self-expression. So the sort of need, there's a strong need with somebody with a very high scoring sun to express themselves through whatever medium, usually a somewhat creative one, but it can be just as a sort of leader in their field. Okay. Persona, right? We talk about persona in the Jungian sense, which again comes from the Latin for mask. Again, there's a consciousness aspect to that, because obviously Jung himself said that that it's not really desirable to have a persona. But persona is a protective mechanism. It's a means of interacting in the world whilst protecting one's core self. But obviously, is it not better to be able to just be oneself in the world and not have to have a persona? So again, I think if you're looking at somebody with a fairly low level of consciousness who has a very high scoring sun, then they will probably have a fairly carefully constructed persona. It will give them the need to present themselves, or even better to say, make a presentation of themselves. Okay. They're not just going to turn up in their pajamas, with their hair sticking up on end, and eating a bagel that they've just that they've been eating for breakfast. This is somebody who is going to be much more careful about how they're perceived. Okay. Now, a certain level of that is healthy. Yeah. We all know the types of people who just don't make an effort. It's not important to them, so they're probably kind of low-scoring solar types who really don't care how they look to others. Okay. Again, it's like healthy. There's a healthy medium, isn't there? So that's the thing to bear in mind. But obviously, if your sun is scoring very high, that's something that's going to be on your radar much more than if your sun is very low. That's the point. Okay. Again, so role model, I put in here, if you are a high scoring solar type, then you will be interested in making a good role model of yourself to others. Low scoring, you're not really that bothered. Okay. And finally, being noticed. It's a slightly it's a slightly uncomfortable side of the Leo dynamic. It's probably one of the less desirable traits of Sun Leo energy, but there's always a slightly uncomfortable need to be noticed, and it can be a bit compulsive where Leo is concerned. That's not to say that it's all negative, because of course it's not. In actual fact, where would any of us be without the the showmen and women in our lives. They entertain us, don't they? So let's not knock it, but let's just be aware of what it means in terms of high scores and low scores. So taking all those things into account, now we look at Liam's sun here, and he's got a 15-point sun. What else can we say about it? I don't think that's unrealistic. The sun is fairly happy, yes. He's not really besieged by anything. There's no really hard aspects. He's happy enough in the 10th house. So that's kind of what you might describe as, in his case, as a kind of healthy level of narcissism, rather than an unhealthy level, right? So that's the sun. Moon. You can always pause this and come back to it later. Moon, yeah. Well, these are the words that we understand and use when we think about the moon. Safety, security, comfort, one's family role, the routines one has, food, very important, familiarity, which obviously derives from the word family. So these are the concepts that if your moon is a very high scoring point, these will be important to you. You will focus on them, okay? If your moon is very low scoring, they're not going to be that important to you, right? So, are you the kind of lunar person? Is it really? Do you really look forward to going home and getting into your pajamas? My son Teddy, who is 10, he would live in pajamas if he could, and he has a very high scoring Taurus moon. So yeah, that is definitely one of the factors. Are you a pajama person? And if you are, then you've probably got a high scoring moon. On the other hand, if you are one of those people who's really kind of happy to rough it and sleep in a hedge, then you've probably got quite a low scoring moon. Listen, there are caveats. There are always caveats. It's really important that we understand this. If you have a high scoring moon in Capricorn, it's not easy to get a high scoring moon in Capricorn, because obviously immediately your moon is in the placement of its debility, so that actually takes points away. But supposing you had Cancer rising and moon on the descendant in Capricorn, as I have actually, then you get a funny kind of you can get a funny kind of mix. You can get a fairly high scoring moon in a sign that is really antithetic to lunar norms. Okay, so what you will often find with somebody like that is that they are they're interested in making the uncomfortable comfortable. They're becoming comfortable with discomfort, right? So there's a kind of natural inbuilt stoicism in that kind of a placement, and I guess you get the same thing, of course, with an Aquarius sun, for example. Yeah, now if you have a sun in Aquarius, but you have Leo rising, and again, your sun is on the cusp of the 7th house, which will lend its strength. And you have other factors which lend dignity to the sun as well. Then you will find yourself naturally coming into a kind of creative or leadership role, because the sun is important to you, but you won't be doing it. You'll be doing it in an unconventional way. So you'll be an unconventional leader. So you're honouring the kind of style of the sun at the same time as its importance. Yes. So it's important to you, but you can't do it in a conventional way because it's in Aquarius, right? So that, yeah, unconventional leader, and moon in Capricorn, somebody who's comfortable with the uncomfortable. Right, so moving on. Mercury, yes. Mercury's always interesting. Because, of course, it's fundamentally about communication. And movement, as I've written here, expressing one's thoughts, and I always think of like the sort of Gemini dynamic as being like the butterfly that just flits from one thing to another, and it's a very mercurial style. So Liam Neeson with his 35 point Mercury is going to be extremely interested in communicating his thoughts, expressing himself, and actually, if we look at his chart, I think it's really important to just make this observation, because with a reasonable Sun and a very, very strong scoring Mercury also being conjunct the Sun, so it's almost like his creativity, which is his Sun, is realized through that Mercury, that enormous power of Mercury to be a mimic. Okay, so it's to do with mimicking leadership roles, styles of behavior, the persona. Okay, so Sun in Gemini is a mimicked persona, and in the 10th house, this is somebody who gains status and reputation as somebody with great skill. Okay, another Mercury keyword is skill, dexterity. You being able to utilize tools, craftsmanship. So there's very much a kind of craft of mimicry in the way that he does his thing, and he has a great reputation for that. 10th house, yes. So that Mercury is extremely important, and he is going to be massively focused on it. What happens to the person with a really low scoring Mercury? Well, often they don't really have anything to say, or they don't want to express it. They may be a very thoughtful person, they may be a very highly intelligent person, but they're not necessarily interested in communicating their thoughts. So that is what happens. Hang on, where is it? And then there we are. They're not particularly interested in communicating their thoughts. They're not particularly interested in being gregarious, getting out and about, visiting, having neighbours. Somebody with a low scoring Mercury is not particularly transient. They tend to be quite content with staying in one place, and keeping their thoughts to themselves, quite happy not to say anything. Okay, so these are the ideas. Once again, you can get strange combinations, because if you have Mercury in the sign of its debility, so in Sagittarius, doesn't mean that they're not going to want to communicate, but other factors would need to come into play, and it would affect the style of communication. Okay, the thing with Sagittarius is it's very deep. Okay, it's quite a deep sign in that respect, and that doesn't really suit the natural style of Mercury, which doesn't want to stay too focused on one thing for too long. Okay, so once again, it leads to a kind of unconventional or unusual expression of the archetype, but the archetype will nonetheless be expressed. Okay, Venus, yes, harmony, relating, and partnership, luxury, possessions, relaxation. These are all the important things for the Venus type, for the strong Venus. And of course, most people with strong Venus are interested in being in a relationship. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sort of formal marital type relationship. It can be a very close committed friendships. Those are important. Business partnerships, some sort of involvement with others is a key factor. Okay. Somebody with a strong Mercury is probably not always that content to just do things on their own. They generally speaking just want company. Okay. And once again, very low scoring Mercury, not bothered by harmony, not bothered by peace, I mean, there's a kind of stress factor around, anti-stress factor around Venus, that people just like to feel really chilled out when they've got a strong Venus. People who have a very weak Venus just don't really notice that stuff. They're not so aware of atmospheres, and they're just not so much aware of other people. It's just the way they're made. It's fair enough. So Mars, yep, independence, pioneering, self-reliance, action, danger, adventures, that kind of thing. The Mars person is assertive. They say what they think. Again, it's kind of like the antithesis to Venus. Now, interesting, isn't it? So what happens to the person who has a weak Mars? Well, it's kind of like a minor key or a difficult key of Venus. Yeah. Because they don't feel they don't feel so confident going it alone in things. They're not very pioneering, they're not very adventurous, just not interested. It just doesn't interest them. And you can often see people who have a very strong Mars. They're very pushy to get their way. They're quite self-focused, and for that reason they can often be high achievers. Yeah, but they don't necessarily make friends along the way. Or even if they do make friends, right, they don't often keep their friends. It takes a special kind of person to bump along happily with the very Mars-centered soul. We all know this. Jupiter, right, philosophy, self-improvement, conviviality, fellowship, and meaning. So these are kind of Sagittarius ideas, aren't they? Meaning is really important to the Jupiter person. Strong Jupiter means that their life has to have a purpose. Yeah. They are generally people of social bonhomie. They drink the wine. They sing the songs. I love Jupiter people. Good fellowship. Yeah. And people with a weak Jupiter, they don't have that. They just they're not very philosophical, right? They're not really interested in preserving the good things in life or improving themselves in that kind of philosophical way. Yeah. Their idea of improvement probably won't involve things like religion, moral concepts, ideals, philosophies, literature, art. The Jupiter person's generally quite cultured. And again, there are levels of consciousness involved in that. So you can be morally cultured, or you can be cultured in terms of culture, right? So important distinctions. But if your Jupiter is very low, those things you're not bothered by. You don't spend any time doing them. Okay. Saturn, yes, well, we know what Saturn words are, don't we? They're authority, convention, rules, respect, tradition, industry, and effort. Yeah, all those good things that our Puritan forefathers, instilling on all of us that Puritan work ethic that the neoliberal mindset so loves to exploit, gets us all out doing jobs for a pittance. Because we just feel like we have no self-worth if we're not working really hard, even if we're not benefiting at all from it, and laying aside all the actual kinds of improvements that we need. It's a funny old world, isn't it? So yeah. Now, what happens when somebody gets all this stuff in overdrive and they have a very high Saturn score, um, then yeah, um, they tend to be good at playing by society's rules. Somebody who doesn't have those things strong is very often just not interested. They're not interested in the future, saving for the future, building the pension, being responsible, taking on responsibility. And in a way, that may seem like a great thing, because they're just living life one day at a time. Yes, it's almost a kind of the ideal of Buddhism. But in terms of societal expectations, they're often losing out because they're not building for the future. They're living in the now, and the future doesn't really seem that important. Remember, Saturn is the lord of time, so the future suddenly looms into view when we think about Saturn. Most of the other planets don't have a future, but Saturn is all about the future. So anything that Saturn contacts, it has a future-oriented perspective. Okay. So there's a kind of there becomes a time factor involved in those things. Yeah. So if you have Moon Saturn as a woman, then you probably you get anxious about your biological clock. Yeah. If you have Sun Saturn, you will worry about being a father, and what you provide as a father for your children, for the future, and all these kinds of things. So it becomes a time, chronological dimension to everything. But if you have a really weak scoring Saturn, then don't think about it. It's not on your radar at all. Okay, now getting out into the outer planets. We have Uranus. Well, we know what these things mean. Uranus is a really interesting planet because I think it's so often people really find it hard to sort of get to grips with it. But the way that I always thought of Uranus is that it's almost like the planet that rejects where it is, where it's placed. So you notice that like people with Uranus Moon or Uranus in Cancer, they kind of end up moving away from where they were born, from their family of origin, because they kind of reject it. So wherever you find Uranus, it's almost like you reject the themes of that placement, right? You find them, I don't know, kind of distasteful or limiting or a bit sort of sad. So I don't know, if you have a lot of people, my generation, Uranus Pluto, have a kind of almost a contempt for for people of great wealth, the plutocrats. People with Venus Uranus have a kind of real discomfort with sort of expressions of lovey-doveyness. They find it all a bit mawkish and sickening. So that's kind of how Uranus seems to work. You just like spurn whatever it's connected to. Now, so if Uranus is really strong, then you can come across as a really cool person because you're like totally unbothered. Yeah, you're unconnected. You're dispassionate about things. You reject all the normal human concerns that everybody else has, right? So yeah, in a way, it's like the planet being cool. But if your Uranus is really low scoring, then you're not interested in that. Okay, it's not a factor for you. Right, Neptune. Things spiritual, romantic, humanistic, eternal. Yeah, escapism. We know about this. Really downside of Neptune is that we like the Scotch or the weed, or God forbid the opiates. Sympathy. So there's a softness to strongly Neptunian people. They are they're quite human and humane. They care. They have those softer qualities. They value the immaterial. Okay. Now that's really interesting, because what happens with Liam Neeson? What happens with him is that, I don't want that, do I? Look at this. His Neptune scores an astonishing -4 points. So I want you to think about that. What does that mean? It means he's really disinterested in Neptune themes. He doesn't care about them. They're not important to him. So what will that do to somebody? I mean, bear in mind, this is not, once you get out to these outer planets, it starts to get subtle. But let's look at his chart. So Neptune's in the second house. So he doesn't have, the second house is about what we think of as being valuable. Okay. So with that really weak Neptune, what we can probably say is, and actually he has a very strong Saturn in the second house as well. He will see the material stuff, the concrete stuff, the stuff that puts away for the future of his physical material self, Saturn, as being very important, and the stuff that is immaterial, that might otherwise be valued, as extremely unimportant. So to somebody like Liam Neeson, deep down, it's about money in the actual bank rather than in the spiritual bank. Yes, he's not somebody who gives a flying monkey about his soul in the hereafter. Okay, he's not particularly interested in charity or being charitable. He's not going to be particularly philanthropic or humanistic. He's not going to have a great deal of sympathy, okay, because that's just not his value system. Okay, his value system says, now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that he's a complete cement head. He may, of course, care about people, but to him, it's not a motivating force in his life. Okay, he's not going to improve the world by spreading love and light, as we New Age people like to say. He is much more interested in what money can do, what materialism can do, than what immaterialism can do. So that's how that works. Right, and now we're getting to the deep dark stuff, aren't we? Pluto. We could probably do a whole video on this, couldn't we? Pluto, yes, right. Well, dominance, control, superiority, excellence, depth and intensity. These are the things that interest the strongly Plutonic person. I should add, my Pluto is very weak. I'm not personally very interested in these things, but I have met some very challenging individuals for whom these are overriding factors of importance in their lives. And it's difficult, because if you are not, I'm a Scorpio, don't get me wrong, I love intensity when I see it, but I'm not particularly bothered by it in myself. But it's the dominance thing. Again, it's actually a level of consciousness issue, because you can be a strongly Plutonic person. Of course you can, but if your boundaries are good, if you've done your Orcus work and your Ixian work and your Pluto work, of course, then the chances are these are not going to be problems for you. But of course, you're always going to meet people who will try to dominate you and control you, and make you inferior to them. I mean, it's part of ongoing, eternal, and extremely tedious human game, isn't it? The way that everybody selects their criteria for superiority based upon, generally speaking, luck. They've been fortunate enough to be born into X, Y, or Z situations, and then they make that the benchmark for what superiority is. So, some people it's, I don't know, money, and some people it's what schools they went to, and some people it's what car they drive and what clothes they wear, and I suppose those are all quite materialistic ideas, but generally speaking, Pluto works in such a way that it's sort of manipulative, not just of others but of themselves. So they just select what they're naturally good at as being the benchmark for excellence, and then they immediately get ahead of the game. But the key, of course, with even if you don't have a very strong Pluto, is that you have to protect. One has to protect oneself from the depredations of others' Pluto. Otherwise, you just end up being on the shadow side of the Pluto game, where you are powerless. Giving away all your power all the time. You're the doormat in the situation. You're being used and manipulated by others. So yeah, it's a balancing act, and this is of course where Ixion comes in. Orcus and Ixion, because these are the keys to Pluto. The key to Pluto in terms of Orcus is that we have integrity, so that we do not allow ourselves to step beyond our code of behaviour. That prevents us from falling into negative Plutonic patterns. With Ixion, we develop good and healthy boundaries, which allows us to not be manipulated by others. Right? So they're all working in a kind of sympathy with one with the other. And yeah, we'll do some work on that too. So yeah, if your Pluto is very strong, and you are the benefits of that are plain to see. You strive for excellence. You strive to be superior, and that can drive people to great success. Yeah. So that's a good thing. Yeah. And as long as you are superior, your drive is only to be superior to yourself, your former self, and to improve your own situation, rather than making others inferior to you. Then there's nothing wrong with that. You can utilize that Pluto healthily if you have a lot of it, so long as you are heeding those other Hadean keys, Orcus and Ixion. So yeah, moving on to Orcus, of course: integrity, solitude, asceticism, endurance, privacy, rejection. These are all themes of Orcus, and they will be important to somebody whose Orcus scores high. Okay. And they won't necessarily be as accessible to somebody whose Orcus scores low, right? Doesn't mean you don't have integrity if you have a low scoring Orcus. It just means that it's not necessarily a guiding principle of your life. We all meet these people, don't we? We all know these people for whom their reputation for integrity is a key facet of who they are. And there's not many people, to be honest, is it? We don't meet many people for whom that's a big thing. But when we do, we know it. So those are probably strong Orcus people. Okay, and finally, and I'm not going to be talking for very much longer, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear, because this has been quite a long discussion. Chiron. Right, well, Chiron's interesting, isn't it? And we need to do a thing on Chiron, because people talk about Chiron being healing, wounding and healing. Well, that's part of the mythology, but really, to me, yes, of course there is an essential wound around Chiron. So if you have Chiron in hard aspect with Venus, then there is this sort of wound of being unloved, generally comes around, from childhood, normally around age 14. Okay. So yes, and that does inform a great deal of one's experience and life understanding and everything else. But actually, Chiron is much more to do, in practical terms, to do with teaching and stewardship, and actually shamanism, which I'm going to have to do. We're going to have to do a whole thing on this. And I did a thing on the astrology of healing a while ago, where we talk about Edward Batch, the inventor of the Batch flower remedies, who had incredibly high scoring, important Chiron placement in his chart. Because we think about the mythology of Chiron, and he really was a very unique individual amongst the tribe of centaurs, because he was one of the few, I think, very few centaurs who had managed to tame his animal nature, alongside Pholus, who was more of a soothsayer, I guess you would say. But Chiron really did rise above that and became extremely cultured because the centaur, the idea of the centaur is this tension between one's refined human nature and one's animalistic beast nature, and the centaur is the literal joining of those two concepts. And most of the centaurs would not behave very well, because they liked to drink and have sex and party, and they couldn't kind of conquer those instincts in themselves. So they would go through periods where they were behaving well and trying to be good, but then, just the scent of wine would send them all off their rockers, and they would go mad and indulge in great debauches. So, which is what happened in chiromancy, as it's called, when they... anyway, that's probably not pertinent, is it? Not particularly good tangent, but just the smell of wine was enough to make them all lose all composure. So when we think about that, we think about somebody, a creature that has evolved beyond the normal constraints of its race. They've had to totally conquer their animalistic nature, and this has set them apart from their people. Okay, now that is the key quality of shamanism. It's the idea that we have become set apart. It has a little bit to do with Orcus energy, but these are the kinds of ideas that are going to interest somebody with a very strong Chiron, right? And yes, there will be an outsider to some extent as a result. So that's what it means. Those are the ideas that we need to think about when we talk about having strong or weak planetary placements. Now let's I think we just revisit this chart here, and I'm just going to very briefly look through this lot here. Now if we look at most of the chart, you can see that anything I think over the score of 10 or above is reasonably healthy, reasonably manageable, is not going to be underexpressed, not going to be ignored too much. Anything below, so it's really kind of between 10 and 29, or even 25 perhaps. 10 and 25 are that's the general range of sort of normal expression of a particular archetype. Anything over that is going to become a real point of extreme focus. Anything over 25 really, and especially over 30, that's going to be something that person really works on in their life. They pay a lot of attention. It's important to them. It's part of what they need actually to feel good about themselves and to have good mental health and everything else. So, with this really strong Liam Neeson's really strong Mercury, he needs to communicate his thoughts. He needs to in 10th house as well with the Sun. He needs to put on a show, to entertain others with his mimicry and everything else. It's an enormously important part of his persona, and he needs to do that to feel positive about himself and to feel that he's heading in the right direction. And we can also probably say that Mars is very strong as well, even though it's only scoring 17 points on this list. It nonetheless has an enormous effect on the way that he comes across and expresses himself. So what does that mean? Just briefly, I'm just going to say this because I think one of the really interesting things with Liam Neeson is, I've seen a few of his films, and he seems to always play this same type of character who's extremely ruthless. Yeah? And that is his Mars in Scorpio in the third house. The third house is the natural house again of Mercury, so he kind of mimics that type of behaviour really well, that kind of ruthless action sort of person. And that does suggest that he's very good at that, and again, there are these sesqui squares between Mercury and Mars, so he has a way of speaking that's kind of ruthless and very penetrating, quite threatening, quite scorpionic, So it's all part of this, and that Mars also connects to the Sun. So it's an extremely powerful Mars because it's peregrine, but it does make a tense connection to Mercury and the Sun. So that part of that mimicry ability, that's part of his career, but it's also part of his persona, how he projects his persona, how he comes across to others, because that's the Sun. So really fascinating how all those things come together, all those really strong points. And that Neptune, which is extremely weak, right? Well, he's not. He doesn't come across as somebody who's sort of lovey-dovey and romantic and cares about everybody's well-being. No, he'll just execute them, and that's what happens in those films. So really fascinating the way that all those kinds of ideas can be seen to work. So right, listen. This has gone way too long, and I need to work on my, my precision in terms of what I'm talking about. But I do hope that by sort of going on at length and discussing all these various ideas, you have got a good feeling of how one should apply these kinds of scores and what they kind of mean. Okay, so we'll look at this next time, because I'm going to do another video on on other nuances around this topic. So what we will say is, if you've got if you've got both a strong Venus and Mars, that's interesting, isn't it? Because you're not only interested in harmony and partnership, but you're also interested in independence. That will give you a certain type of relationship signature, won't it? Yeah, you'll be very interested in being in a relationship, but you're not going to be remotely codependent. Yeah, you'll also want to be living your own life and doing your own thing, but at the end of the day, you want to be in a relationship at the same time. So that's going to be a different type of person for who is all Venus and no Mars, isn't it? So we can really actually get a very clear idea of personal style from just looking at these scores and seeing what they mean. As long as we are able to see, the mitigating factors such as peregrination and everything else, I think we can really get an idea of what matters to a person. So what I want you to do is, if you want to, sign up to the to the $20 tier, and we will continue down this road learning about all of these things. And if you are interested in doing that, what I would like you to do is, first of all, find out if from any of these rules, if you have any peregrine placements. incidentally, I'm here, and I'm happy to help you. So if you are not sure, then talk to me. You can send me a message on here. It's private. You can send me an email, and I will help you work out what you have that's peregrine. And then I want you to have a little think just about what your strongest point is, and how that is really interesting and a point of focus for you, and what your weakest point is, and how that is not so interesting and not a point of focus in your life. So that's a little bit of homework. You don't have to do anything about it, but I just want you to just try and work out what those points are, and just have a think about what it might mean, because it's interesting, and that's how often we gain an insight into the practical application of these ideas and rules and concepts. So yes, exciting things to come, I hope. And if you've got this far with me, I'm very grateful for your your time and attention, and I hope it wasn't too long-winded, and bless you. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time.